Micro interactions are simple and subtle when done well, just like a lot of great design. But actually achieving really great micro interactions is a bit trickier than you might think. In this video, you'll learn how to create 3 different micro interactions the right way here in Figma. We're going to start out by making this heart icon into a like button used on a product thumbnail image. Next, we'll tackle this toggle switch, and we'll finish off with these accordion elements that make up an FAQ section. You can use these techniques to animate almost anything, but let's get started with the heart icon. Okay, so these are the products that I want to have a little heart icon here. And I want to be able to click on it and have a cute little interaction of it, like, vibrating a little bit or bouncing a bit, and then it will fill in a different color. So I have my heart icon here, and to do any type of interactions or transition design, you need multiple states of a different element. So for this one, we're going to have the before state. We're going to have like kind of a middle state, and for this state, it's going to be, the heart's going to be a bit bigger so that it grows and then shrinks, so it kind of looks like it bounces a bit. And then we're going to have the finished state or the filled state. So let's kind of see what these need to look like. This one, so let's design what these each need to look like, but first, so that we can use this multiple times throughout our designs, let's make these into a component. So I'm just going to select all of them. Go up here to the components icon and create a component set. So now we have 3 of the same component. We need to name them differently so that we understand what's going on here. So the main component's called heart. This state should be called empty. This state should be called transition. And this state should be called filled. Okay. So let's select all of them and give them a layer fill. Okay, so let's select all of these shapes and give them a layer fill. Maybe something like this bright pink. In the empty state, this layer fill should actually have a 0% opacity. So we still want it to be there because when we use Smart Animate, what Figma does is it looks at the different layers that are named the same across each element or each state, and it will sort of animate the difference. So if we want the opacity to gradually and naturally grow after we click it, we want to have that fill exist in the first state, if that makes sense. Even if you can't see it at all, it should be there. So that's why we've done that even in the empty state. In the transition state, maybe we should make this at 50% opacity, or maybe even 75 would be good so that it gets that color pretty quickly. Let's try 75 and we'll just keep experimenting here. But the other thing we want to do with the transition state is we want to make this heart a little bit bigger so that, like I said, it gives that illusion of it like bouncing or like growing a little bit and then kind of settling back in to the normal size. But this time it will be 100% filled with this pink color. Okay, so now that we have all of our states, let's animate them. So I'm going to go into prototype mode, and we're just going to grab this plus icon and drag the arrow to the transition one. So on click, we want it to transition into the transition state using Smart Animate. So that's important. We want it to use Smart Animate. And I think easing in and out should be good. Maybe like 200 milliseconds. Again, we can kind of play around with this after we test it out. Okay, and then we want to create another one here, but we don't actually want this to happen on click. We want this to happen after a delay because we only want to click it twice, right? We want to click it, it grows a little bit, and then automatically kind of goes back to that, settles into this filled state. So after a delay of, the least you can do is 1 millisecond, we want it to change to the filled state. And let's try ease in and out. Again, we can play around with it. And let's make it pretty quick, 100 milliseconds. Okay, and then we can get rid of this click one there. Okay, so now let's go back to design mode. And I'm going to copy this component and we're going to add it to our product image here. Okay, so before we add it to the rest, let's kind of see if we like how that looks. So I'm going to click on here on this whole artboard with all of our designs and click the play button. There we go. So that looks exactly how we wanted it to look. The heart grows a little bit and then shrinks back down, and the color change is a little bit more subtle. So you could play around and you could get really creative with how that looks. I like to keep things subtle so that they feel natural and like what we're used to with like normal interactions in the real world as well as on our digital devices. But that's a pretty good example of how to create something that feels like natural for the real world. If you were to tap on something, it would kind of move a little bit, right? And things would happen really sort of gradually and naturally. So that is our heart icon. And what we could do is take this and duplicate it onto all of the rest of these product images. And since we've made all of this prototyping happen on the component level, whenever we preview this prototype, you'll be able to interact with this in the same exact way anywhere that you have pasted that icon. Okay, next, let's work on this toggle. So again, we want to make this into a component first. And that's just because we may want to use this other places in our designs. So it's just a good rule of thumb. So like I mentioned before, we always want to have at least 2 different states, right? So we're going to call this toggle and we're going to duplicate it. And this is what the toggle could look like when it's on, you know, like this bright pink color. But when it's off, we want to move the toggle to the other side. And maybe we want to have this be just sort of like a blah gray color to make it feel like it's off, right? Maybe we even want this fill to be like 75% so that it just feels like, I don't know, off per se. Okay, so we'll do exactly what we did before. We'll go up and create a component set and just name these. State on, state off. Okay, cool. We'll go into prototype mode and we will drag this arrow to the next one. So when you tap on this, the state should change. And instead of ease in and out, let's do bouncy because I just think this is kind of a fun, use case to use bouncy on since it's sort of like this circle bouncing back and forth. And maybe we'll see what 800 milliseconds looks like. And then we also want to do it back to start, right? So same exact thing, but back to the on state. So then let's go back to design mode, copy this into our design and head back into our prototype and see what this looks like. Okay, pretty cool. See how bouncy that is? That might actually be too bouncy. You can kind of go in and play around with these. So let's see. Go into prototype mode. So instead of bouncy, what if we did a custom spring? So see how that like really, really kind of bounces. So let's see. Stiffness 6% or 600. Let's see if we did 400 instead. Yeah. And then damping, what if we did 8? Oh, that's too much. So maybe we do 40. It's not enough. So what was it when we started? Yeah, 12 is too much. 20. Okay, yeah, 20 kind of feels good. 600, that's better. Okay, so same thing. We want to do, custom spring. Let's do 600. And what did we do here? We did 20 and I can't remember what that was that we did before. 400. Okay, now let's test this out again. So again, we only had to make that change on the component level in order for us to see it on our instances. Okay. So it's good, but you see how it goes outside of the lines a little bit too much? That's what I don't like. So a fix for that might actually be to make this circle a bit smaller to just give it more room. So we made this 22 by 22 with 4 pixels on each side. 22 by 22. Okay, let's test this out. That's better because it kind of like hits the very edge and then bounces back to where it's supposed to be. So see how you really have to get into the nuances here. Like when you watch something, watch it with a lot of sort of like discernment and like a critical eye so that you can say, that doesn't feel right. Kind of evaluate in your head what needs to be different for it to feel more natural. And that sort of just goes along with design in general, right? You want to like put enough thought into it so that it feels like there has been no thought put into it, if that makes sense. So, okay, that's our toggle. Now let's do something a little bit different. Let's tackle this FAQ section. And have you ever seen those sections where basically you tap on, like a question or something and it will open a drawer of some sort with more information? That's exactly what we want to create here. So as you can see here, we have the 2 different states already kind of designed out and they look alike this, right? So what I'm going to do is the same thing we've been doing. Create this into a component set. This way we can just keep using it and just change the text as we go. So we do want to have the same question here though. That's important. Here we go. So this is going to be, let's name this correctly, Accordion. Don't know if I spelled that right. And we'll do state closed and state open. Okay. So one thing that we definitely want, the obvious thing is that we want it to grow. So this is definitely, a step in the right direction there. But I think we want to make sure that we have auto animate on for this because that is going to help us, kind of hug the contents here. So I'm just going to click on this frame and turn out auto layout. So we want to have a fixed width, but we want it to hug the contents. So that's good. Same here. We want to have a fixed width, hugging the contents. We want this to fill the container. These need to be framed in the same selection. And then here we go. Actually, in order to have these line up, I actually don't want to frame these together. So ungroup. And we want to frame these together. Frame selection. There we go. That's actually better. And then we want this to fill the container. This also. So this frame in general also needs to have auto layout on. Okay, so by playing around with auto layout a bunch, we've got it to where we could type anything in this field and this component would grow or shrink based on what we have. So let's say we got rid of this. You can see it is flexible, and that is all thanks to auto layout. And that can get a little bit tricky. I could do a whole video on auto layout, but basically that is what you need to do. You need to have each container hug the contents vertically and have a fixed width. Okay, so now that that's done, let's get into how this interaction is actually going to feel. So what I definitely want is for this icon to kind of twist as this drawer opens. So I'll show you what I mean. So let's take this and actually duplicate it here so that we're using the same thing. They have the same name because Smart Animate will actually because when you're using Smart Animate, the frames in each individual element or state have to have the same name, or else, you know, it can't really be smart and it can't really tell what you want it to do. So now what we're going to do is rotate this. So I just rotated it 90 degrees, and I am going to take this point here and drag it in, this point here and drag it in. And that way we've used the same element, but it's kind of twisted and it's going to turn into the minus sign instead of the plus sign, right? Okay, and we can see if we want to make it pink. I think making it black might help that like fun transition stand out, or feel more natural than for it to transition in terms of shape and color. That might be a little jarring on the eyes, but we can kind of figure that out. So now let's create that actual animation. So anytime this is clicked, we want to change the state to open using Smart Animate. Instead of this custom spring, we're just going to use ease in and out. I think that will be nice. 300 milliseconds should work. And then we want to do the same thing going back so that you can close it as well. And we could really center that action on these so that you have to tap on these icons. But in this case, I don't think we need to. I think tapping on the whole question should kind of bring it open. But anyway, let's see how this looks. So going to take this component and put an instance of it in this little FAQ section here. And let's just test this out before we add any more. Let's test out how this looks. Okay, that's pretty cool. So really look at this plus icon that turns into the minus icon. That's pretty cool. The only thing I'm noticing that's weird is the stroke. Do you see how does the stroke change? Or the radius? That's a bit strange. Let's see if we can fix that. Okay, so the radius here is 24, and here it's 24. But I think because this is longer, the radius just feels kind of different on each of these. So let's see, what can we do to kind of fix that? I think one thing that we could do is add a white stroke here. So stroke, we want it to be the same exact thing as this. So it's a 2-point stroke on the inside. So 2, but we do want it to be white so that you can't see it. Or I'm sorry, we want it to be the same color as this so that you can't see it. Okay, let's see if that helps at all. Yeah, no, that's still definitely pretty jarring. So instead of using a stroke here, let's get rid of the stroke on both of these. Let's see if that's any better. So now we have something happening with the opacity. So let's see, this is, I think we want to get rid of the opacity here. So instead, we just want to sample that color and use the sort of 100% value. Let's look at this again. Okay, that's a lot better, but I just don't love this color. So let's actually make it a bit brighter. I think something like that would work better. Okay. Yeah, that's so much better. Okay, I really like this. Okay, so now there's kind of a second part to making this work well, and that is this actual component in general. So let's go ahead and duplicate these questions here, and you can see they're inside of this frame. So let's turn on auto layout for this frame. We want to have just 20 pixels between them. We need to frame these separately from this so that we can give it some different spacing. So frame selection, auto layout, 20. And then with this, we want to have a good, let's say, 60 pixels of padding. That's too much. 40 pixels of padding on the top. I think we need a little bit more on the sides. Okay, that's pretty good. Okay, and then maybe 24 in between the title and the start of these. Okay, so that's pretty good. And then what we want, instead of hug, we actually want a fixed height on this. So let's do 700. Okay, cool. And then because we've set up auto layout like this, let's see what happens when we click on these. See how it pushes these down? That's because of auto layout. So that is super key to making this interaction work. And it's all just auto layout and making sure that you're clipping the content on this frame here, and you have auto layout turned on so that there's always the same amount of space between these, no matter how big or small they are. All right, guys, now that you're armed with these animation techniques, go ahead and apply them to your own projects and check out this video where you can learn how to create this really trendy and beautiful gradient style in Figma.